They say a nation's soul lives not in its kings, but in its memory. And when memory is threatened, it is the women who rise first. This is the forgotten story of a grandmother who became a general, of a woman who defied empire with only her courage and the spirit of her people. Her name was Yaa Asantewaa, and she fought the British when no one else would. Long ago, in the green hills and red earth of what we now call Ghana, there stood the mighty Ashanti kingdom. It was rich, proud, and feared. The Ashanti built cities, carved gold, and crowned kings. But at the center of it all was something sacred. The Golden Stool, not a throne made for sitting, but a stool said to have descended from the heavens, carrying the soul of the Ashanti people. It was believed that whoever held the Golden Stool held the destiny of the nation, and no one, not even kings, dared sit on it. The stool was life itself. In the small town of Ejisu, in the mid-1800s, a girl was born into royalty. Her name was Yaa. She was not a princess in the way we imagine. She was not pampered or spoiled. She worked the land, walked barefoot, and watched quietly. But Yaa was chosen by tradition. As she grew older, she became the Queen Mother of Ejisu, a title of power in Ashanti society. She had the authority to choose kings. She advised them. She corrected them. And when necessary, she replaced them. In her eyes burned the fire of leadership, though few could see it yet. But fate was watching. By the end of the 1800s, the British had begun swallowing West Africa. Piece by piece, kingdom by kingdom. They were not just taking land. They were taking pride. They called it civilization. But the Ashanti called it war. They had fought the British before. Sometimes they won. Sometimes they bled. But they always stood. That was, until 1896. That year, the British exiled King Prempeh I, the Ashanti king, to a distant island called Seychelles. They burned down the royal palace. They silenced voices. And then they made the greatest insult of all. In 1900, British Governor Frederick Hodgson stood before the remaining Ashanti chiefs and demanded the Golden Stool. Not to see it, not to honor it, but to sit on it, to claim its power, to declare himself not just ruler of land, but ruler of soul. The room went cold. The chiefs lowered their eyes. Fear crept in like smoke. No one dared speak, because to refuse the white man could mean death, and to agree would mean disgrace for generations. Then a voice rose, not a man's voice, a woman's. Yaa Asantewaa stood and looked them in the eye, and with fire in her voice, she said, "Now I see that some of you fear to go forward to fight for our king. If it were in the brave days of old, the Ashanti would not sit back and watch their king taken without a fight. Is it true that the strength of the Ashanti is no more?" And then she said the words that made history shake. "If you, the men of Ashanti, will not fight, then I shall. I shall call upon my fellow women, and we will fight. We will fight till the last of us falls on the battlefield." There was silence, then murmurs, then thunder. The chiefs who had sat in fear now rose in shame and pride. A grandmother had called them to battle, and so began the War of the Golden Stool. Yaa Asantewaa, over 60 years old, took command. She became the leader of the Ashanti resistance. She wore battle cloth. She gave orders. She summoned warriors from across the land, men and women alike. They surrounded the British fort in Kumasi, cut off all supplies, sealed every path. For 3 months, they laid siege. The British soldiers inside were trapped, hungry, afraid, and stunned. How could this be? A woman? A woman had shut down their empire? But this was no ordinary woman. Yaa was everywhere, inspecting, commanding, praying, shouting from hilltops. She was wind and fire. Mothers cooked for warriors. Children sang war songs. The old carried water and arrows. This was not just a war. This was a people rising to protect their soul. But the British did not sit idle. They called for reinforcements. Soldiers from Sierra Leone, from Nigeria, came with heavy guns and fresh boots. The Ashanti had spirit, but the British had steel. The war turned. Villages burned. Allies broke. And betrayal crept in. A chief, fearful for his life, revealed where Yaa was hiding. The British moved quickly. They captured her. The Queen Mother who had dared raise a nation was now in chains. In 1901, they sent her to exile, to die far from home, on the same island where her king had been imprisoned. She never saw Ejisu again, never saw the stool again, never touched her land again. She died in silence, forgotten by the world, but not by her people, because they never found the Golden Stool. The Ashanti hid it so well Not even the British ever touched it. And that was Yaa's final victory. The soul of the Ashanti remained intact. In time, Ghana would be born. In time, the people would rise again. And in time, the bones of Yaa Asantewaa were brought home. Statues were built. Her story whispered in schools. Her face painted on walls. But outside Ghana, the world forgot. The British wrote her off as a rebel, a witch, a disturbance. But we remember. We remember that she stood when kings sat, that she led when generals hid, that she fought not for glory, but for dignity. And when asked why she risked it all, the people say she answered with this: asterisk, because I am a mother, and mothers do not let their children be dishonored. Asterisk, they tried to erase her, but the rain does not forget the root, and the lioness may fall, but her roar echoes through time. But what if I told you this wasn't the end? That the British feared her more in death than they did in life? That her name would return decades later, not as a warrior, but as a weapon of memory, carried on the tongues of women rising in protest, in revolution, in leadership across West Africa? What if I told you secret letters from the colonial officers revealed that Yaa Asantewaa had not only led a war, she had sparked something they could not control, a resistance that grew like wildfire long after her bones had turned to dust? In part 2 of this story, we'll uncover what the British really wrote about her, the truth they buried, and the forgotten legacy of how a grandmother's war shook an empire and inspired generations to come. Because sometimes, history is not written in ink. It is written in fire. And Yaa Asantewaa was the match. When Yaa Asantewaa was captured and taken into exile, many thought that would be the end of the rebellion, the end of the soul, the end of a mother's fight. But sometimes, the most powerful battles happen after the war. And sometimes, when a queen leaves, her spirit stays behind. They thought the Ashanti would fall silent. But in the years that followed, the name Yaa Asantewaa became more than a memory. It became a seed planted deep in the hearts of women, in the hearts of daughters who had watched their mothers weep, in the hearts of young men who grew up hearing stories whispered by firelight, stories that the British tried to erase, but could not, because truth does not die in chains. After the war, the British rebuilt their control. They called it the Gold Coast. They built railroads, post offices, churches. They said it was progress. But for many Ghanaians, it was still captivity, just with a new name. And deep beneath it, quiet, the spirit of resistance lived on. It lived in the songs the women sang while farming. It lived in the eyes of the elders when the colonial officers walked past. And it lived in the one name they refused to let go of: Yaa Asantewaa. She was no longer just a queen. She became a symbol, a warning to colonizers, a reminder to the people, a promise that someday the soul of Ghana would rise again.
In the 1940s, as whispers of independence grew louder, women began to organize. Markets, farms, churches. Everywhere. They gathered in silence. Then in circles. Then in marches. And when they needed courage, they shouted one name. When they were beaten back, they remembered one voice. When they were told to stay quiet, they remembered one woman who had spoken while men stayed silent. Yaa Asantewaa. Even in exile, she was still leading. Still teaching. Still fighting, through them. But it wasn't only in Ghana. Across West Africa, her story spread in secret. From Senegal to Sierra Leone, from Nigeria to Benin. Women who had never seen her face spoke of the old queen who had challenged the whites with only her tongue and her heart. British officials noticed. In classified colonial reports, still hidden from the public today, there are letters warning that her legacy was dangerous. That even dead, she was inspiring unrest. One official wrote in 1932. Asterisk, there are murmurs of a spirit, they call her the Ashanti mother. The women grow bolder. Asterisk. Bolder. And unstoppable. Because they weren't just fighting for freedom. They were fighting with memory. And memory is a weapon the empire could not control. In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence. The people danced. The flags changed. The speeches rang. But behind all the celebration was a quiet tear for those who did not live to see it. For the kings. For the warriors. And for Yaa Asantewaa. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president, once said. The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked with the total liberation of Africa. And many say, it was Yaa's voice they were still hearing through him. That her fire was still burning through every word. But here's the part they never told you. In the early 2000s, while restoring the British records, Ghanaian historians discovered something shocking. Old letters. Reports. And a hidden journal from a British officer stationed in Kumasi during the siege. Inside, he wrote of a secret ceremony. One that happened just days before the British captured Yaa Asantewaa. He claimed she had hidden something. A scroll, a box, or perhaps, the true location of the Golden Stool. The journal ends abruptly. No one knows what was written after. The next page is missing. Some say it was stolen. Some say it never existed. But others believe it's still out there. Now, historians and spiritual leaders are once again searching. Looking through the old caves near Ajisu. Following maps drawn in charcoal. Asking the last elders still alive what they remember. What she may have left behind. Some believe Yaa Asantewaa didn't just fight a war. She planned for the next one. Left behind clues. Left behind a legacy hidden in plain sight. Because a woman like Yaa doesn't just vanish. She echoes. And now the question stands before us. What did Yaa Asantewaa hide? What truth were the British so afraid of? And why does her name still shake even the walls of empire?